Hello and good evening, everyone. What a wonderful film we just watched. My name is Russell Roots. I am the Community Outreach Manager with the Utah Film Center, and I'm joined tonight with Bonnie K. Baxter, Ph.D., Director of the Salt Lake Institute and Professor and Chair of Biology at Westminster College. Good evening, Bonnie. Oh, feel free to unmute yourself.
I will. Nice to see you, Russell. What an amazing movie.
Yeah. Thank you all for again joining us for the post-film discussion with Woman in Motion. Now, Bonnie, you're part of the Astro fan club. I mean, you're Trekkie and so on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Oh my. Um, I guess I'll start with the beginning. I was born in 1966, and my very first memory is the Apollo 11 moon landing because it was such a big deal in my household. As we gathered around a black and white TV. And for years after that, I would look at the moon and I thought I could see astronauts on the moon. Like I grew up thinking I could see people on the moon. And of course, those were white men that I was used to looking at. And I think I always wanted to be a scientist. I think I was inspired by all of that. But there were many signals that I got early on that science was okay, but I really shouldn't shoot for the stars. So I kept this astronaut thing in my back pocket. And I was always driven towards science. I ended
Mhm.
up getting my PhD in genetics, but I came back to space science because now I study biomolecules that get preserved in salt. And it turns out that is really relevant to the mission on Mars right now. So I've been working on some of these aspects with respect to how Great Salt Lake
Mhm.
might be similar to some of the ancient salt lakes on Mars. So that's how I got from there to here. But in the middle, I was enamored by Star Trek. And I do think my three brothers, because I wanted to watch Gilligan's Island after school and they wanted to watch Star Trek. And because there were three of them, they always won. So I had to watch Star Trek and I fell in love with it. And of
Mhm.
course, Uhura was the person I identified with. So I really, really have a lot of gratitude towards Nichelle Nichols and the first woman in science, maybe that I ever saw.
Mhm. I did think it was super fascinating in the film the way that they made that comment about she was the only woman that when she said captain, everyone stopped and looked.
Yeah, right, right. Might have been because they made her wear that short skirt, but I do, I do think her costume could have been a little better.
Yeah, it was still the 60s.
Yeah, right, right. There has been a lot of discussion about that.
Hmm.
Um, I thought it was interesting she didn't dwell on that, but they did stop and listen, and I think a lot of us did. I mean,
Hmm.
she there weren't that many women in power on TV, particularly Black women, and it was a really unique role.
Hmm.
And Gene Roddenberry's vision for the future not only had different people in the bridge than we were used to seeing in power, but different races of all sorts and different lessons about how humanoids were all the same. And
Hmm.
there's no money in Star Trek, right? Because
Yeah,
everybody has what they need. You have a replicator to make
yeah.
food, right?
When you have a replicator, why do you need currency?
Right. So there's something so ideal about the Starship Enterprise that
Hmm.
I think I grew up loving that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, and it's I kind of grew up in the next generation kind of decade, that era there, but I'd always watch some of those older ones and kind of look at them and kind of scoff. But as I got older, I realized that was the real deal, and that's kind of where the magic really lied. And of course, the
Yeah.
motion picture and Wrath of Khan and so on. But yeah, it was a wonderful legacy, and I have to say that your brothers were wrong. Gilligan's Island is long since been forgotten.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
know, I know. Star Trek lives on.
yeah,
Star Trek lives
yeah,
on. It
absolutely.
it did take a while to get the costumes right because I think Next Generation still had Deanna Troy in the tight low neck
Yeah,
outfit. So
yeah.
like it did take some time to get the costumes more equal.
Yeah,
Um,
not really until probably. Deep Space Nine?
Yeah, I think that's right. Janeway had the
Yeah,
best outfit. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, totally.
So we'll see. So you have a couple of slides to show us of kind of about
Sure,
what you do, kind of how the Great Salt Lake matches up with what
sure.
happens in space.
It might seem like an odd segue, but it is why I'm interested in Mars, and so I'd love to show you just a few slides. So
Sure.
I don't want to give an academic lecture. So really, I'm just filling in a little bit about why I'm here in the first place. Hopefully, you can see that.
Yes.
This is a picture taken by an ESA, European Space Agency astronaut called Alexander Gerst, and you can see Great Salt Lake and Bonneville Salt Flats in the context of our planet. And I love that. I think it's really an amazing picture. You also can see where this railroad causeway breaks the lake in half. And that causes that north part to turn pink because the north part's not getting a lot of fresh water input. So it gets super, super salty. And it turns out the microbes that live there have this pink color, which is also in the background behind me. And so there's actually pink water, and I study the microbes that make that water pink. So that part is really special to me. So that's the Bonneville Salt Flats. That's also special in our story because the lake and the salt flats are due to um, larger lakes being at this site and drying up, evaporating. The last larger lake was called Lake Bonneville. Over a couple, over a million years or so, mostly it's looked like Great Salt Lake, but there have been 4 episodes of large lakes at this site, and the last one was Lake Bonneville. So anyway, just so you know, this is the Bonneville Salt Flats. What happens when a lake dries up on our planet is that it leaves all of its minerals behind. And this is currently what we're looking at on Mars. This is where Perseverance is, where a lake dried up at Jezero Crater. And we're going to bring home samples from the minerals that are there. So I want everybody to know in Utah that in our backyard is a place that's really similar to the site we're exploring on Mars, which is very fascinating.
Nice, nice. No little helicopters, unfortunately, not yet,
No,
anyways.
we have had some drones out there. It would be good for me to take an analog image, but I don't have one right now. So this is another shot from the astronaut Alexander Gerst, and you can see that pink water of the north arm, the railroad causeway, and then the greenish water of the south arm because there's more algae here. The south arm is still 5 times saltier than the ocean. The north arm is about 10 times saltier than the ocean. So we're talking about some serious salty water.
Hmm.
And I work right here a lot on the salty shores of this pink bay. So this is Promontory Point. It bothers my husband, who's a geologist, because north is not up, but north would be where the star is in this case. Sometimes I laugh when we're looking at like where the lake has dried up and we see this salt flat left behind. I laugh when I read geology papers because they always say humans for scale. So I've started trying to put humans in my pictures so you can see how big they are. So for this talk, I also had to put Uhura in there just so you get an idea.
Seems appropriate.
Yeah. Um, so I study these things called halophiles, and they're mostly in the banner of what we call archaea. So they're 3 domains of life. If you went to college back when I did, you learned that there were the plant and animal kingdoms, and we no longer talk about life like that. We talk about life in 3 domains. And so a lot of the extremophiles are in this domain called archaea, archae meaning ancient, because they look like microbes that might have been on ancient Earth and also ancient Mars, I might add. When you grow them on a petri dish, they're pink, just like the water is pink in the north arm. So that's where that water gets its color. I once stood up on an airplane very upset because the pilot said, "We're now flying over Great Salt Lake. Do you see the pink water caused by the brine shrimp?" And I was like, "No, it's not the brine shrimp. It's the halophiles, the salt lovers that are making the water pink."
All
Also,
right.
we have some halophiles that are in the other other domains of life. So I was
Mhm.
pointing those out. So you can see this is headed on a boat to Gunnison Island, and you can just see how red the water really is. I'm not making this up. This is fairyland. This is like you're kayaking on water that's pink with mountains around you. It's a
Wow.
beautiful place up there. Very, very pink. This is one of my students digging salt crystals out of a salt pond from one of the salt companies around the lake. You can see vividly how pink the water is. And on the right, you can see these microbes growing right on top of salt crystals. So they don't care how salty it is. They don't care if there's no water, they can dry up inside salt crystals. So I call this one of their superpowers, that they're super tolerant to salt. And that becomes important if you're looking for an organism that can live on a space body like Mars. They also can deal with radiation. So they survive. If you shine radiation on them, they come back. They don't care. They survive. They also can last inside salt crystals over time. So this is inside a salt crystal, and these little microbes are swimming all around. They're totally happy for millions of years, millions. So they do get entombed in minerals. And that's why we say if Mars used to have life, maybe it's still there in the rock record. So that's the connection to our work at Great Salt Lake. We look at these minerals that are at Great Salt Lake, like these beautiful salt crystals, or these gypsum crystals, or these mirabolite crystals. And we ask ourselves, like, what does life have to do to live inside of a rock? And that gives us information that we need to analyze samples from Mars. So are these minerals on Mars? The answer is most likely yes. We have confirmation about gypsum from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter work, and we have confirmation about halite. We don't have confirmation about mirabolite, but there are reasons to suspect it is there as well. So this slide is for me to remind you that Mars looks like this today, but back at when Earth was very habitable, when we were starting to form life on Earth, Mars looked more like Earth. So that's the tricky bit. Mars used to look like Earth. So 3.5 billion years ago, billion, not million, 3.5 billion years ago, our planets were formed like 4.5 billion years ago. So 3.5 billion years ago, Earth starts to get habitable and has an atmosphere and has flowing water and has good temperatures for life, and life erupts. And it's very possible the same thing could have happened on Mars, because Mars was a very similar planet at that time. And then the magnetic poles shifted on Mars, and Mars lost its tectonic activity, it lost its atmosphere, it lost its standing surface water, and so it became the desert planet that it is today. The question is, do any of its rocks still have evidence of life, or was life ever there in the first place? But this is the reason we're asking the question, because Mars and Earth looked a lot alike at the time that Earth was erupting in life.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right, so now I'll just give you a couple words to make sense of all of that. Remember 3.5 billion years ago, water on Mars dries up. This is very analogous to when Lake Bonneville dried up to form Great Salt Lake. And the water in the lakes on Mars, as it evaporates, just like Great Salt Lake, becomes saltier. Lake Bonneville was a freshwater lake, but all the minerals got concentrated into Great Salt Lake. And so that would have happened as lakes dried up on Mars as well. So the last lakes on Mars would have been salt lakes. That's why this is important to draw this relationship, because the lakes now will have left behind minerals like the Bonneville salt flats. That's what we expect to find under that red iron Martian dust. We expect to find basically Bonneville salt flats. And if microbial life ever was there, the last life on Mars would have been salty life. And that's why I'm excited about halophiles. So I see this, to sum this up, as three possibilities, and I don't like one of them. The first one is no life was ever on Mars. That one is no fun at all. So I'm throwing that one out. Okay. I mean, it's very possible there could have been never any life on Mars, but I don't want to entertain that. The second is there's life there now. There was life and it hung around and it's now inside the minerals or in subsurface water. And we are currently designing experiments. I'm on a NASA paper for searching for extant life, existing life on Mars. So that's in the mix. But the other possibility is life was there, but now it's extinct and it's gone away. And if it's extinct life, it may have left fossils behind, not dinosaur bones, because we don't think the conditions on Mars were good enough for long enough that we could have developed complicated life, but microbial life, yes. And so if that life is gone, what kind of traces could it have left behind? Could it have left DNA in the salt there? Because we can analyze DNA we find in salt on Earth, so that in ancient salt. So that would be really fun. So extant life, existing, or extinct life. Those are the two possibilities I'm shooting for.
Wonderful.
Extant or extinct. um, so just think about this, like if the last life on Mars was salty, then halophiles could be entrapped in salt under Jezero crater where Perseverance is going to be digging, which is very exciting. If extinct life is, it's gone, but it was there, we might find molecules in that salt. And these samples are going to be returned. About 35 samples or so are going to be returned to Earth in a few years. So that's going to be a really fun time to analyze these data. And that's my super halophiles, has all the superpowers in the world. And I'm sure that they can live on Mars.
Wonderful.
That's
Oh,
molecules in case we don't find cells. So that's really all I wanted to tell you, that I've been working on in collaboration with NASA. And I'm really excited to be brought into this conversation about Nichelle Nichols, because I really was inspired by her and by Star Trek to go into science. And I know many women and many people of color who were, including Ronald McNair, who is one of my heroes. So I'll stop with what I'm studying, just to get back to the conversation about her and about this wonderful film.
well, I mean, to get to the point where we're doing more of what could be happening on Mars, we're going to need to send people. We can't just continue to send
Right.
very wonderful robots and little mini copters and so on. We do have to send people at some point, and we're definitely in the stages of doing that. But I mean, I think one of the things that the film really brings up is that who are those people that are going? And it's
Yes.
important that there is a broad range of those people to bring all of those different experiences. So to kind of circle back to the film, we really have to ask, or at least challenge ourselves, like as Nichelle Nichols said, where are my people? Like, who is representing me in the future doing these very wonderful space activities? So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's kind of curious is you do have this pedigree and this wonderful experience that you have, but again, this is generally historically has been a male dominated
Yeah.
field. What have
Yeah.
your experiences been as a woman in STEM?
Well, one thing that's kind of interesting to me is, even as of late, like some of the online communities can be really sexist and racist, when you're putting yourself out there talking about space science. So any of these communities that are involving space science, if someone posts an article that's about, like, for instance, the Artemis mission is about getting the first woman on the moon.
Hmm.
That's not all it's about. It's about testing out space transport so the moon becomes a launching station for
Hmm.
Mars. So there is a trajectory towards Mars. But when people post online in these forums about, like, women who've been chosen as potential astronauts for this program, the response is often things like, well, I believe the most qualified people should be chosen,
Of
not
course,
women.
of course.
And no one ever says that when anybody posts about a white male astronaut,
Hmm.
right? So
Of
there's
course.
this subtle sexism and racism that still underlies an ownership felt about the space program. And I'm not putting that on NASA necessarily, because NASA is a publicly funded enterprise. Um, and so I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of educating the public. And we shouldn't just, I love what Nichelle Nichols did,
Hmm.
but we shouldn't just be putting women and people of color in these places to have to continually make a case for themselves. It has to be everybody doing that. So I do find a lot of support in NASA's education program called Space Grant,
Hmm.
which comes to every state, and I sit on the board for the state of Utah. In terms of, they are so sensitive about funding opportunities in STEM, particularly for underrepresented groups in science. So I will say that aspect of NASA is really progressive. Um,
Yes. I mean, as NASA has was shown in the film, they've had this issue where their ranks are calcified in certain ways, but they've also done really great historic leaps into integrating various different places, Alabama and Texas, and so on, and really trying to make sure that there was some diversity of thought and diversity of experience coming into the aerospace field. And it worked in some places, and obviously, as the film has shown us, it didn't work in others.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the space shuttle program is so interesting. And I know it's a time frame that they focused on a lot, because that's when Nichelle Nichols was working pretty heavily with them.
Hmm.
I was in college when the Challenger explosion happened, and I was really into space science. And so I came home from my early college class to have a snack before I went back to my lab, and watch TV to see it and plan my day around it, and was devastated. Um, in part because they had really started an outreach campaign to get everyone excited. There were women on that craft. There was one of my heroes, Ron McNair, who um, many of the listeners might not know that there is a program funded um, through federal monies across the nation called the Ronald E. McNair Scholars Program, and it supports students in college. And we have the only one in Utah housed at Westminster College. It supports students in college who want to get their Ph.D. And they have to be from underrepresented groups or be first in their family to go to college.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, we're producing so many PhDs in science from this program across the nation. So Ron McNair lives on, and his name lives on in the gratitude of all of these people who receive funding in his name. So I that the whole Challenger thing was meaningful to me and continues to be meaningful to me, but I didn't know her connection to that. So I appreciate that about the film. It
Yeah,
was very
yeah,
touching.
it was very nice, very nice. I felt that way about Ellison Onizuka. Just I knew the name, but just didn't know the history there. And
Right.
speaking of history, we have a viewer question, and I do encourage, if there's any other viewers watching
Please.
tonight, if you have
Yes.
questions, please send them in.
Yes.
JD asks, well, JD also says, "Thank you for a great discussion. How did you and your work get involved with NASA?"
Oh, good question. A number of years ago, because I work on extreme life, a lot of us extremophile people who study life in Yellowstone and life in thermal vents and life at high salt, a number of us started getting invited to this field of astrobiology. And I really didn't understand it at the time. And I started reading more about it and realized it's been around since the beginning of NASA, 1958. Um, there was a person called Joshua Lederberg, who was a microbial geneticist who actually won the Nobel Prize for microbial genetics. And he became part of NASA. He was the first biologist to work with NASA right when it started. And he believed we needed to think about microbes that would be transferred when we took spacecraft off our planet, and that
Hmm.
we needed to think about microbes when we returned spacecraft to our planet. And he wanted to start this idea of exobiology, and it later got called astrobiology. And he actually recommended this young whippersnapper at University of Chicago as an intern at NASA, who was Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
So Carl Sagan got brought to NASA by a biologist, which is hilarious. So I've always loved interdisciplinary science. I've loved thinking about the interface of the way different disciplines work together. So I loved when I started getting invited to speak at astrobiology meetings and NASA meetings, because I was in this extreme life, in these extreme life studies. And then I started teaching a course called astrobiology, and that was mind-blowing, because I had to read more and think more about the origin of life on our planet and how life might have originated elsewhere. So I'm deep in this field, and I'm going to NASA meetings. At this point, I'm having a lot of fun with it, because I told you I've always loved space science. So I'm having a great time getting to know astronomers and geologists and all these different disciplines represented at these conferences. And then I got contacted by someone who works at the Jet Propulsion Lab, and they said, well, Perseverance is going up, and we really want to test some instruments on salt that looks like a place that Jezero Crater is similar to, and we think Great Salt Lake would be a great place. And so we hosted them a number of times to come and sample here, and also sent samples back there, and I've been back there to work in their lab. So that's been kind of fun. And I think mostly it's not really about me, but about Great Salt Lake, and everybody in Utah ought to be proud about how special this place is. I mean, this is a crazy place that is right next door to us. And it's so unusual that NASA's like, what? We've got Mars on Earth. Okay, we're coming there. So it's really about the lake.
Yeah. I think to say you're having fun is an understatement.
Yeah. I do love my job.
We have a question here from a viewer. Adrian asks, and this was inevitable, it was going to happen. Which Star Trek series / characters are your favorite?
Oh, heavens. It would be wrong for me to say Uhura, because you would think that I was making that up. But okay, if we can talk for a minute about Captain Kirk and how ridiculous he is. Like, he was such a caricature of being, right?
Yeah.
So he's off the table.
Well, there's probably a reason he wasn't in the documentary, and he doesn't get along with the rest of the crew either.
Yeah. He's got a bit of an ego problem.
Yeah.
But still, he provided the campiness that I think was also part of the original series, and that's okay. So he served a purpose. Uhura is hard for me to not say, so I'm trying to not say her, because like, if I hadn't seen the film, I would probably say her, but now I'm afraid you're going to feel like that's forced. So if we could for a minute just mention Spock. Spock represents an interracial character from another planet. And Spock, one of the great things about sci-fi, really good sci-fi, is it probes this question about what it means to be human. So if you're thinking about life elsewhere, you have to sort of define that life elsewhere in the context of human beings. And so really good books make this analysis in a way that makes you think about, well, are humans really special? And like, what does it mean to be intelligent? And what is intelligent life? And Spock's character, in a time of racial unrest, and I grew up in the South in the 60s and 70s. So I grew up in the civil rights movement, and my parents were rather activist in the civil rights movement. And so I was exposed to that. I grew up in a college town, and that resonated with me, that Spock had a human mom and a Vulcan dad, and struggled with that. and also that Spock was a scientist, because I'm also very logical and I totally got
Hmm.
the way he thought. But when he allowed himself to become human, um, it was the part of Star Trek that probed that for me.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it was very telling of the times. And later in Next Generation, Data does that.
Yes, Data.
Data really brought out that whole conflict of Spock about
Hmm.
what does it mean to be human. But of course, Data was an android who was sad that he wasn't human, and that was sad. And it's hard not to love Jean-Luc Picard, because he is like, there is nothing lovelier than that man, and I would have to be with him any day. So it's hard not to love him.
Yeah, and the new show is pretty good as well. I really enjoyed Picard. It wasn't
I
that
did
bad.
too. I did. But can
Uh,
I talk
oh,
about Wesley Crusher for a minute? Because that guy needed to go away.
of
Do you
course.
remember that?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Does
definitely.
everybody hate Wesley, or is it just me?
Wesley took up a special space. Like they needed the lovable scamp, and he was there. That was his
Yeah.
role. Don't know that he necessarily was needed, but it is what it is.
This whole nanobot getting loose on the ship thing, like that was just
Was his version of Tribbles.
it was indeed.
Yeah, I mean, I was always a big fan of Khan, but Ricardo Montalban's Khan, not Benedict
Yes.
Cumberbatch, because that
Yeah.
the camp and
Yeah.
just the stature.
Yeah. Almost nobody does camp like Ricardo Montalban.
No,
It's
no.
the truth. But in the later movies, like when you find out that Khan's in that last movie, it was like, what?
Yeah,
What's that do? Yeah,
yeah.
that was shocking to me, because I did not see that coming.
And then there was all the other Spocks, the multiple Spocks.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have another question. Jamie asked, or also says, my mind is blown with samples being taken on Mars and sent back to Earth that might have Martian life in them. Could we inadvertently affect Mars with Earthling microbes? And is there a Star Trek episode that predicts this?
In Star Trek, there's something called the Prime Directive,
Yes.
um, that we don't interfere with other worlds. And they break that rule in every episode. It's
Mhm.
constantly put out as the guiding principle, and then they continue to break it. And I always wanted to like be on Star Trek court, because you could take these people to court. Every single episode they break that Prime Directive. So we have something on Earth, particularly at NASA, called planetary protection. And it's kind of similar. I think we break it every time we send a spacecraft. So the idea is, if there is life, if we find life on Mars, this is actually going to reframe this entire conversation. Because right now, we have one sample of life in the universe, and you might think we have, you know, billions of samples of life on our planet, because a slime mold is not the same as a snail or a giraffe or a dog or a human. But actually, it is the same. All of our life forms on Earth share a few common denominators, and that tells us that they're all related, that we all had a common ancestor um, in our origin of life. So there's one origin of life that we know about in the universe, and a sample size of one to a scientist is nothing. You want larger sample size to understand the way something happens. So we had one form of life erupt on Earth, and it became the tree of life over time. Once life erupted, that's called abiogenesis, from no life to life. Then evolution happened, and that life evolved into all of these different forms that we see today. But they're all rooted in, they have DNA as a genetic material. They make their proteins the same way. All of our cellular machinery is the same. Our genetic code is the same. The way we decode is the same. So we know that we're all related to one emergence of life, right? So if we find out that there's another emergence of life, not only in the universe, but in our solar system, that will blow everything out of the water, because that means if it happened twice, it likely happens in galaxies all over the universe. And that will change our mode of operation when we interact with other worlds, because we will be contaminating them.
Hmm.
There are organisms in the clean room at NASA that they can't get rid of. There's quite a microbiology program to keep track of them. So we know if we detect life on Mars that we didn't take it there, we know what the background is of what organisms that are on instruments that we can't get rid of. And so we'll be able to subtract the background out.
Hmm.
So that is being looked at very carefully, but it is breaking the prime directive over and over again.
That is fascinating. And it's what's more human than breaking the rules all the time.
All the time. Yep. All the time.
I do want to talk about another little slice of Mars that we have here in Utah. We do have the Mars Society and the Mars Desert Research Station.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Yes. The Mars Society is run by a person in Colorado called Robert Zubrin, and it's an international organization that is dedicated to the idea of colonizing Mars with humans. And the Mars Society started and helps raise funding and supports the Mars Desert Research Station in Hanksville, Utah. And I helped start the Utah chapter of the Mars Society a couple years ago, because it was really weird that it exists all over the world except in the state of Utah, and they're
Hmm.
state chapters. So, like, why wouldn't it be here? And we got them a seat at the table on the Utah Space Grant, NASA's committee for the state of Utah for education funds. So that's been fantastic. But what the Mars Desert Research Station really is a southern Utah terrain with a hab, they call it, but a structure where you can go with a research group and stay for a week. You have a lab, you have access to lab materials, you can test rovers, you can test spacesuits and equipment as if you were on the surface of Mars, because
Hmm.
the terrain in southern Utah is very similar. So many scientists from and engineers from all around the world come here to use that. In the summer, or late spring, May, June, they have a rover competition that
Oh,
universities all over the world come and compete to try to get the best rover design. So those are engineering universities, and BYU is the um, most excelling university in the state of Utah who's done the best at those competitions. So I'll give a shout out to BYU. They're doing a good job.
all right. Go Cougars.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for giving us some background on that. I think it's a very cool thing to know that we've got a little slice of the heavens right here in Utah amongst all the other things, the Great Salt Lake and all of our dark sky parks. So that it's
That's
just
right. That's
this
right.
this state just continues to keep giving us really great things.
Yeah. It's a really amazing place to live because of the outdoors. It
Hmm.
really is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're kind of run out of questions here, and I think we've had a really good conversation. Bonnie, I want to say thank you yet again for participating. It was really a joy to have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you, Russell. It was super wonderful to be here, and I really appreciate sharing the film with you. It's great.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's watching this evening. I hope you enjoyed this discussion as well. We will see you next time. And before I sign off, I'd like to thank Science on Screen and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for making this possible. Everyone, have a good night, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.